Hi, welcome back to biology. My name is Mr. Kubuske. Today we're going to be working on Unit 4. We'll start with the cell membrane. It's all about cell transport and moving things in and out of different types of cells. So today we're going to talk about the cell membrane, which obviously allows things to travel in and out of the cell. We'll talk about that. And then in the next class we'll talk about how things travel, and we'll continue with there. Now, today we're going to take graphic notes. We've done this once before, but it's just something I like to do. It kind of keeps things organized, and it also helps with being able to see something when you're actually writing the notes and kind of making the connections that way. So there's two pictures going to be working with today. Obviously the one you see here, the cell membrane, but your paper that you're taking the notes on should match. If you don't have one of these, make sure you download it from the website. This will be the front side, and then these two boxes are on the back side. We'll talk more about the boxes when we get to there. But obviously our picture here, you can see we've got a cell membrane laid out for us. It looks like we have some gumdrops stuffed into the cell membrane right over here. But they have a specific purpose, and they're part of what the cell membrane is made of. So that's where we're going to start. We're talking about what the cell membrane is, and it's made of phospholipids and protein. Okay, now what is a phospholipid? Well, let's pull one out here. Okay, here's a phospholipid. If we zoom in on it, there's two parts to it. There's a phosphate head, which is this circle here, and then there's two fatty acid tails. Now remember, fatty acids are the building blocks of lipids, hence the name phospholipid. Get it? Okay, now if you'll look, okay, the cell membrane is in two parts. Okay, the heads on either side are always pointing towards the outside, and then the tails are always pointing towards the middle. Well, that's because the heads are water loving, and they're hydrophilic is what we call that. And believe it or not, both inside and outside the cell is composed of pretty much all water. Okay, the tails then are hydrophobic, meaning they're afraid of water. Now the reason that the heads are hydrophilic and the tails are hydrophobic is that the heads have a charge, and so they can be attracted to the water and water's charge, but then the tails do not have a charge, so therefore they always point in the opposite direction of the water molecules because they don't have that charge. They're repelled then by water. Now you'll notice, like I said, there's two layers of them. That two-layer setup is called a lipid bilayer. That's just because there's two layers of those phospholipids, and you'll notice that obviously you can see kind of the two different distinct areas of the cell membrane. Okay, the orange being pointing towards the outside and the purple pointing towards the inside. Okay, now the cell membrane is what we call selectively permeable. What that means is that it only allows certain materials to pass through. Now, what's going to determine if things can pass through? Well, first of all, it's going to be what the stuff is composed of, but it could also be the size. You can see my little yellow droplet here, okay? Because of its size, its relative size, notice it kind of shrinks and wiggles through. Okay, it can fit through the cell membrane, but something like my little spiky friend here, okay, he can't fit through. Just because one, he's got a bigger size than that little yellow droplet, and two, he's got those little spikes. So he's going to need something to help him get across the across the cell membrane because of his size and his shape. And what we use in those cases is something called a transport protein. It's a protein that covers the entire distance of the cell membrane, meaning that it goes from the inside to the outside, and then it has a channel through the center of it. Sometimes you'll see this called a carrier protein because it'll carry materials from one side to the other. But for our purposes, we're going to call it a transport protein. And it's literally going to allow things to transfer or transport from one side of the cell membrane to the other. Now, it's very specific. Only certain things can fit into each type of transport protein. So you actually have several types of transport protein on your cells. If you go into more complicated biologies, you'll talk about antiports and symports and how that all kind of works. But for our purposes, again, we're just going to call these all transport proteins. The second type of protein, our purple guy here, he's known as a receptor protein. It's like a little antenna on the top of your cells. And what it does is it receives signals from other cells in the area that might tell it to do a specific function. They might tell it to change shape. But whatever it is, the only way that cells can communicate with each other is with these molecules. Now, believe it or not, I know you've heard that like your nerves carry electrical impulses, and that's how they communicate. Well, that's true, but those electrical impulses are actually opening channels that allow molecules to move from one cell to the other, and thus carrying the signal. And that's how your nerve cells talk to like your muscles. So that nothing could actually communicate without these receptors and the things that give them their signals. Okay, so that's what that is. And then our red guy over here, he's known as a marker protein. And all that does is it marks the cell. It tells the cell type, says that it's supposed to be there. These are helpful because white blood cells recognize your markers. If they see a cell in your body that doesn't have these markers, they will attack it. which is why people that have undergone organ transplants, they usually have to take medicine, some type of pill that's called an immunosuppressant. And what it does is it suppresses their white blood cells from attacking that new organ that they've just received, because its markers are going to be different. Now the markers you'll notice that shape that we use all the time. That's because these hexagons represent carbohydrates. The markers are made out of carbohydrates. So we've included lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates all into our cell membrane. Now the carbohydrates are markers. They're not actually part of the cell membrane. That's why we didn't include them up here. Okay. So the review, okay, make sure you have all this information on there. Make sure you label things. Don't be afraid to draw arrows from transport, maybe the receptor, and then the marker. You could do that as well. But everything you see on the screen you should have to this point. Okay, now we're ready to flip to the opposite side. Now, why do we have so many cells? What's the advantage of that? Why not just be made of, like, I don't know, 100 cells that are just a lot bigger, since we're bigger organisms? Okay. Well, it all has to do with being able to maintain homeostasis. Now, if you'll remember, homeostasis is the ability of organisms to have stable internal conditions despite their outside conditions. The larger cells are going to require more energy and more nutrients to maintain their homeostasis, whereas the smaller cells won't need as much, and they can actually travel. Their food can get to them and get to the places they need it to go a lot faster than our big guy over here. Okay, it's going to take him twice as long to get the food in, and then again twice as long to pass the food out to the different parts of his cell, of his one little body there. So therefore, he's not able to maintain homeostasis the way that our smaller guy can. So our smaller guy is actually going to be better fit to his environment, and he's actually going to be the one that survives. Now the reason that he survives is because he can maintain his homeostasis because he has a high surface area to volume ratio. Now, in case you're not in geometry, you had it last year, or just haven't gotten to that point yet, a quick review, and go ahead and write these directly into the spaces that you see them on the screen here. Surface area is equal to the area of a side, so length times width, times the number of sides. Volume then is length times width times height. Okay? Now, if we look at our example here, okay, we have our small guy. He has a total surface area of 6 because it's 1 times 1 times 6. Okay, that gives him a total surface area of 6. His volume then would be 1 times 1. Oh, happy birthday, Elizabeth. His total volume then would be 1 times 1 times 1, meaning he has a volume of 1. When I do that ratio, 6 to 1, I get an overall surface area to volume ratio of 6, area divided by volume. Okay, my bigger guy, let's say he has a width of 5. So it'd be 5 times 5 to get 1 area, then that times 6. So his surface area is 150. So it seems like a good thing because you'd be able to get more things to travel into different places. But the problem is that his volume has exponentially increased. Remember, volume, since it has the 3 parts, it's always something cubed. Okay, that has an impact here. So his volume has now increased so much that it's close to his total surface area. So when I divide the two out, I get a surface area to volume ratio of only 1.2. So that means he has so much space to cover inside his cell, but then he only has a small amount of surface area to get to all those spaces. So what's more efficient then is to take our one little guy, stack a bunch of them together to the size of the big guy, and therefore I keep my surface area to volume ratio the same, but I get the size of the bigger guy, which is how you and I have come to exist. Okay? So the big guy has a low surface area to volume ratio. Small guy has a high surface area to volume ratio. Remember, his was 1.2. Our little guy's was a 6. So cells that are too big won't be able to maintain homeostasis because they can't move materials in and out fast enough. Smaller cells can do this, so they do maintain homeostasis and survive. Okay? So rather than being made of a couple of big cells, we're made of trillions of tiny ones. Okay? Now, to this point, you should have everything on your screen. Quick review of all the things on here. Again, go ahead and write them into those spaces, and they will be helpful to you because you'll be able to understand that the big guy can't survive and the little guy can. All right, and then finally, to review, we have 5 questions here. I'd like you to try to answer these 5. Okay, read them carefully. Pause this probably right now so you don't cheat because I'm going to give you the answers here in about 5 seconds. Okay, so what does permeable mean? How many layers of the cell membrane? 3 types of protein. What's hydrophobic, hydrophilic mean? And then what would be better? Don't worry about question 6. That has to do with the lab we're doing. Okay. Selectively permeable means that only certain materials can pass through. There's 2 layers called a lipid bilayer. And the 3 proteins are transport, receptor, and marker. Hydrophilic is water-loving. Hydrophobic is water-fearing because one has a charge, one doesn't. And then it's more efficient to be made of 1 billion or 1 million cells rather than 10 small ones. And I made it under 10 minutes. Have a great day.